12 hours ago, something crossed an invisible line, and the world quietly shifted with it. What began as a routine, astronomical observation has now become a full-scale planetary security event, and almost no one, outside classified briefings, understands how close we are to the edge. As of February 24, 2026, the Pacific Ocean is no longer just water. One specific point on it has become the most heavily monitored location on Earth. Picture the most isolated place imaginable. No cities, no shipping lanes, no flight paths. Point Nemo, the oceanic pole of inaccessibility, sits farther from land than astronauts aboard the International Space Station. And right now, the United States Navy's 7th Fleet, joined by Australian and Japanese forces, has sealed off an 800 nautical mile exclusion zone around it. This is not an exercise. No weapons are being tested. They are surrounding a splashdown site. At 9:14 UTC this morning, NASA's Deep Space Network and the U.S. Space Surveillance Network confirmed something unprecedented. The object known as 3I Atlas did something comets do not do. It didn't simply pass Earth, it released something. For months, astronomers tracked 3I Atlas as an interstellar visitor, fast, cold, and unremarkable by cosmic standards. But what detached from it changed everything. A secondary mass, roughly the size of a city bus, separated cleanly from the parent body and began a direct approach toward Earth. This wasn't debris, it wasn't fragmentation, it was deployment. The object entered Earth's atmosphere at Mach 25. At that speed, physics is unforgiving. Friction should have generated plasma hotter than 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It should have burned bright enough to be seen across continents. Instead, infrared sensors aboard the GOES-19 satellite recorded almost nothing. No thermal bloom, no heat trail, no evidence of ablation. An object of that mass, at that velocity, remaining cold, is not just unusual, it is impossible by known aerodynamics. Yet, it happened. Rather than tearing through the atmosphere, the object manipulated the air around it. It didn't fight drag. It reshaped it. The data suggests a level of fluid dynamic control we cannot reproduce even in theory. It descended cleanly, silently, and intact, striking the Pacific Ocean at Point Nemo with surgical precision. And here is where the situation becomes truly unsettling. The Navy didn't react after impact. They were already there. Carrier groups had been repositioned days earlier. That means someone knew. Trajectory models didn't just predict an entry. They predicted a target. This was not random. The object didn't fall into the ocean by chance. It decelerated before impact, without visible propulsion, without exhaust, without heat. Gravity alone cannot explain that behavior. Whatever guided, it understood Earth's geography well enough to avoid land entirely and select the most remote location on the planet. The immediate question isn't what fell into the ocean, it's why. Why Point Nemo? Why now? And why does the object's behavior violate nearly every assumption we rely on to describe motion, heat, and impact? Radar cross-section data, leaked from naval sources, answers part of that question. The object is smooth, deliberately shaped, not rock, not ice, not debris. And what it is doing right now beneath 4 kilometers of water is the part no one was prepared for. Because the story doesn't begin in the ocean. It begins far above us, where the first warning signs were quietly recorded and almost dismissed until the data stopped making sense. That warning arrived 120,000 kilometers above our heads, long before the ocean ever came into play. At 6 UTC, astronomers at the Mauna Kea observatories in Hawaii were doing exactly what they had done for months. Tracking 3I Atlas as it cut through the inner solar system at a heliocentric velocity of 44 kilometers per second. The comet appeared stable, predictable, almost boring by interstellar standards. Then, 12 minutes later, everything stopped. At 6:12 UTC, the Keck Observatory's adaptive optics system detected a separation event, a distinct secondary object detached from the main body. Normally, when comets fracture, the process is messy. Heat and tidal forces tear them apart slowly. Fragments drift, tumble, and scatter with no clear direction. What Keck recorded was the opposite. The detached mass did not drift, it accelerated. Designated payload alpha by analysts reviewing the data, the object pushed away from the comet at an estimated 3 Gs of acceleration. That number alone should raise alarms. To accelerate a mass of roughly 4,000 metric tons requires immense energy and an equally immense reaction force. According to every propulsion model we understand, that means exhaust, heat, radiation, or at the very least a detectable disturbance. There was none. Infrared instruments aboard the James Webb Space Telescope, already observing that region of space, detected no chemical plume, no ion trail, no thermal spike of any kind. Newton's third law demands an equal and opposite reaction. The data shows none. Which leaves only one conclusion. The propulsion mechanism does not behave like propulsion at all. Healthy skepticism matters here, and this is where the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. 3 independent systems confirmed the event. Ground-based radar from U.S. Space Command facilities in Florida tracked the separation and the trajectory shift. The European Space Agency's Gaia spacecraft measured the precise photometric wobble of the parent body as mass was released. And China's Tianwen-2 probe, currently en route through deep space, triangulated the position from an entirely different angle. Different instruments, different nations, one identical conclusion: this was controlled. Trajectory analysis made the implications even worse. Data processed at the European Space Operations Center showed that payload Alpha didn't simply fall toward Earth. At 7:45 UTC, while passing near the Moon's orbit, it executed a mid-course correction, adjusting its inclination by 0.4 degrees. That maneuver alone prevented atmospheric entry over South America. Pause on that for a moment. A rock does not correct its course. Ice does not calculate orbital geometry. That adjustment required knowledge of Earth's rotation, landmass distribution, and atmospheric risk. It wasn't avoiding impact, it was avoiding people. By this point, military analysts were already responding. The USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group had been redirected toward the South Pacific 3 days earlier. That means predictive models flagged a targeted entry well before the public knew anything was wrong. This wasn't a surprise, it was anticipated. Spectroscopic analysis from ground-based telescopes in Chile added another disturbing detail. The object's surface absorbed 99.8% of visible light, darker than charcoal, darker than asphalt. Nearly perfect optical camouflage, it entered Earth's atmosphere like a shadow, invisible to the naked eye. When payload Alpha finally struck the water at Point Nemo, hydrophones from global ocean monitoring arrays detected the impact. But instead of the chaotic acoustic signature of a high-speed crash, they recorded something clean, controlled. A precise entry followed by rapid descent. At a depth of 4,000 meters, pressure exceeds 5,800 pounds per square inch. Nuclear submarines would be crushed long before reaching that depth. Yet naval sonar now confirms the object is intact. More than that, it is not resting. Sonar returns show payload Alpha hovering 50 meters above the abyssal plain, no thrusters, no propellers, no visible disturbance in the surrounding water. At that depth, buoyancy alone cannot explain stable suspension. Something else is at work. And just as analysts were grappling with the implications of an object hovering under crushing pressure, a new anomaly appeared, one that had nothing to do with motion and everything to do with what the object was doing to the ocean itself. The ocean noticed before we did. Within minutes of the object stabilizing above the seabed, instruments that rarely agree on anything began reporting the same anomaly. Water chemistry around Point Nemo was changing fast. Sensors operated by NOAA registered a sharp drop in salinity, falling 14% within a 5-kilometer radius. At the same time, dissolved oxygen levels surged by 300%. That combination should not exist naturally, not at that depth, and not on that scale. To understand how impossible that is, consider the math. Altering salinity across that volume of ocean requires removing millions of tons of dissolved salt, raising oxygen levels that quickly demands large-scale electrolysis, splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. The energy needed would normally come from a full-scale nuclear reactor running at peak output, yet thermal sensors showed no corresponding heat. The surrounding water wasn't boiling. It wasn't even warm, at least not yet. This meant one thing. Whatever was down there was processing seawater with extreme efficiency, bypassing waste heat entirely. That level of control over chemistry and energy transfer doesn't just exceed modern technology, it bypasses it. Hydrophone arrays, maintained by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, added another layer to the mystery. At 9:16 UTC, 2 minutes after splashdown, they detected an ultra-low frequency signal, 23 Hz, just below the threshold of human hearing, but incredibly powerful underwater. The sound propagated through the SOFAR channel, allowing it to travel thousands of kilometers with minimal loss. Natural impacts don't produce tones, they produce chaos, noise, random energy spikes. This was different. A stable frequency is intentional. A tone is communication or control. Naval commanders didn't need convincing. The exclusion zone expanded. Submarines moved in quietly. Sonar operators aboard Virginia-class vessels confirmed the impossible. The object wasn't just hovering, it was maintaining position with millimeter precision. No turbulence, no cavitation. The water around it appeared almost frozen. Then came the biological response, and it was unanimous. Marine life fled. Whales altered migration paths. Squid vanished from sonar. Even microbial activity dropped sharply. Deep-sea ecosystems that should have flourished in oxygen-rich water went silent. The area became sterile, as if life itself sensed danger before we could measure it. By 10:30 UTC, chemical probes deployed from the NOAA research vessel Okeanos Explorer showed the changes accelerating. Whatever the object was extracting from the ocean, it was doing so with purpose. The pattern wasn't random depletion, it was selective. At 11:15 UTC, the situation escalated again. Magnetometers aboard the European Space Agency's swarm satellites detected a localized distortion in Earth's magnetic field directly above Point Nemo, 40 nanoteslas. On paper, that seems small. In practice, for a source on the ocean floor to influence the magnetic field in low Earth orbit requires a magnetic moment approaching that of a planetary core. The object was generating a magnetic bubble. Why? Shielding, containment, or communication, no one could say. What everyone agreed on was this. The object wasn't passive, it wasn't dormant. It was active, adaptive, and increasingly powerful. The Navy attempted active sonar pings not to damage the object, but to understand it. Depth charges detonated at safe distances produced no response. The object didn't flinch. It didn't echo back irregularly. It ignored us. Then, quietly, the frequency changed. The hum climbed from 23 Hz to 26, then to 29. Each shift was precise, evenly spaced, and accompanied by a measurable rise in magnetic intensity. Analysts watching the data feeds reached the same conclusion independently. This wasn't noise, it was a charging cycle. The object was storing energy, and when the frequency peaked, something unexpected happened. The hum stopped, the magnetic field stabilized, the chemical processing ceased. Everything went still. Silence returned to Point Nemo, but it wasn't relief. It was the kind of silence that comes right before something answers back. Because while the ocean went quiet, a different system was about to light up, one designed not to listen to water or magnetism, but to intercept messages no human technology should be able to send from 4,000 meters beneath the sea. At 11:45 UTC, the silence broke not with sound, but with data. Aboard the USS Rafael Peralta, a destroyer equipped with the Aegis combat system, signal analysts detected a transmission that made no sense at first glance. It wasn't coming from space. It wasn't coming from the surface. The signal originated from directly below the ship, from the ocean floor at Point Nemo. Salt water is an excellent shield. Radio waves, especially at high frequencies, are absorbed within meters. At a depth of 4,000 meters, transmission should be impossible. Yet this signal arrived clean, coherent, and powerful, broadcasting at 1.6 GHz, a band typically reserved for satellite uplinks. To punch through kilometers of seawater without loss would require power levels measured in terawatts and a method of electromagnetic propagation we do not possess. Initially, operators assumed interference caused by the magnetic anomaly. Then the signal repeated. Identical structure, identical timing. This wasn't noise, it was intentional. Within minutes, the data stream was routed to cryptanalysis teams at National Security Agency. What they found erased any remaining doubt. The transmission followed prime number intervals, a universal mathematical signature used to demonstrate intelligence. Embedded within those intervals was a geometric progression describing spatial relationships. It was a map, specifically a mathematical representation of our solar system. Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, orbital parameters accurate to 10 decimal places, planetary masses, atmospheric compositions, rotational periods, data so precise it exceeded publicly available ephemerides. Whoever sent this knew our system better than most of our own databases. Then came the final entry, a fifth set of coordinates. These pointed to an object beyond Neptune's orbit, aligned precisely with the trajectory of 3I, Atlas. The implication was immediate and chilling. The signal from the ocean floor was not exploratory. It was a status update, a beacon confirming successful arrival. The transmission lasted 14 seconds. In that time, it delivered petabytes of compressed information using encoding schemes far denser than anything humans have deployed operationally. The sophistication wasn't just advanced, it was alien to our engineering logic. Global reaction followed instantly. An emergency session of the United Nations Security Council convened behind closed doors. Russia mobilized elements of its northern fleet. China redirected multiple Tianlian data relay satellites toward the South Pacific. This wasn't panic, it was recognition. Deep Space Network antennas in California and Australia confirmed that the signal wasn't omnidirectional, it was aimed. Directed toward a specific region in the constellation Cetus, an area previously catalogued as empty. Within minutes, the James Webb Space Telescope was retasked to observe that exact point. Preliminary readings came back with a thermal anomaly. Faint, but unmistakable. Something was there. Back at Point Nemo, the underwater object went quiet again. The hum vanished. Magnetic readings stabilized. chemical alterations ceased. But the water temperature on the object continued to rise slowly, steadily, as if heat was being stored internally rather than released. This wasn't shutdown, it was readiness. Analysts ran signal propagation models immediately. Based on distance and light speed delay, any response from beyond Neptune would take approximately 4 hours to arrive. That clock started the moment the beacon fired. As those calculations circulated through command centers, a new development unsettled even veteran operators. The object beneath the ocean began emitting a different pattern, not a tone, not a signal, a rhythmic low-frequency pulse, regular, measured, almost biological. Seismometers in Chile registered micro-tremors synchronized with the pulses. The seabed itself was responding. Pressure sensors spiked. The water column above the object warmed rapidly. The machine wasn't charging anymore. It wasn't transmitting. It was waiting. And waiting implies expectation. By this point, there was no debate about what had happened. The evidence was complete. A payload had been deployed. It targeted the most isolated point on Earth. It survived atmospheric entry without heat. It activated underwater, processed the ocean, generated a magnetic field, and transmitted a detailed map of our planetary system to something in deep space. What remained unanswered was the only question that truly mattered. If the signal was a beacon, what was it calling? Because the answer determines whether this moment becomes the beginning of contact or the opening move of something far more dangerous. The silence didn't last. At first it was almost imperceptible, a subtle change buried deep in streams of sensor data that only algorithms were watching in real time. Then the pattern emerged. The rhythmic pulse coming from the object on the ocean floor began to accelerate, not randomly, predictably. Each interval shortened with mechanical precision, like a countdown no one had announced but everyone could feel. At the same time, seismometers across the Pacific Rim registered a new class of tremor. Not an earthquake, not tectonic movement. These vibrations were shallow, localized, and synchronized perfectly with the pulses rising from Point Nemo. The seabed itself was responding, as if pressure waves were being injected directly into the crust. Water temperature above the object spiked again, climbing faster now. Chemical sensors confirmed that processing had resumed, but differently this time. Salinity wasn't dropping, oxygen wasn't rising. Instead, trace elements began appearing in concentrations that made no sense. Rare isotopes, normally scattered sparsely through seawater, were being separated and concentrated with extreme selectivity. This wasn't environmental interaction anymore, it was preparation. Then, exactly 3 hours and 57 minutes after the beacon transmission, the James Webb Space Telescope flagged a change at the coordinates in Cetus. The thermal anomaly intensified. What had been a faint irregularity sharpened into structure. Not a point source, not a star. Geometry. Something out there had received the message. Back on Earth, command centers fell into a strange calm. No alarms, no dramatic announcements. Just quiet confirmation spreading through secure channels that the wait was almost over. The object beneath the ocean had done its job. Whatever it was built to do next would no longer depend on it alone. At Point Nemo, the magnetic field changed again. This time, instead of expanding outward, it folded inward, collapsing into a tight shell around the object. Sonar returns flickered, then vanished entirely, as if sound itself could no longer pass through the space it occupied. The machine had isolated itself from its surroundings, and then came the final transmission. It didn't broadcast outward, it didn't repeat the solar system map, it sent a single, ultra-short data burst straight upward through the water column, less than 1 second long. The content wasn't astronomical, it wasn't mathematical, it was temporal, a timestamp. Not Earth time, not atomic time. A reference frame no human system uses operationally. Analysts didn't need long to understand what it meant. The object wasn't asking for instructions. It was synchronizing. At that moment, the pulses stopped. Completely. The seabed went still. Seismic noise faded. Chemical activity dropped to zero. The ocean above Point Nemo became unnaturally calm, like a held breath stretched across hundreds of square kilometers. This wasn't a failure, it was completion. Every hard fact now sits on the table. An interstellar object entered our system. It deployed a payload with controlled acceleration. That payload targeted the most isolated location on Earth, survived atmospheric entry without heat, activated underwater, altered ocean chemistry, generated a magnetic anomaly visible from space, and transmitted a detailed beacon toward deep space. These are not theories, they are measurements logged by independent systems across the planet. Only one uncertainty remains, and it outweighs all the rest. If what lies beyond Neptune responds, we won't be interpreting signals anymore. We'll be reacting to presence. If this was a probe, then first contact has already happened, and we weren't the ones who initiated it. If it was a preparatory system, then Earth has just been surveyed and indexed. And if this object is only the first stage of a larger sequence, then the silence at Point Nemo isn't peace, it's the pause between steps. The next 4 hours will answer questions humanity has asked for centuries and raise others we've never dared to imagine. Data is still coming in, telescopes are locked on target, fleets remain on station. And whatever intelligence set this chain of events in motion has already demonstrated one thing with absolute clarity. It understands physics better than we do. It understands our planet, and it knows exactly where to find us. If you want to stay ahead of what happens next, if you want real analysis as new data drops, and this story continues to unfold in real time, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with this channel. Because whatever comes next won't wait for us to catch up.